March of the year 1211, the Wild Fox Ridge north of Zhangjiakou, wind cutting hard across frozen grassland toward crumbling Jin fortifications standing guard. Genghis Khan has crossed the Gobi Desert with roughly 100,000 warriors and 300,000 horses, moving in disciplined columns. Behind that great wall waits a Jin army of nearly 800,000 infantry, backed by 150,000 elite cavalry. Chancellor Duji Sejong has scattered those defenders thin across countless passes and towers, believing sheer numbers alone will hold this frontier forever. Genghis Khan already knows the truth his enemy refuses to accept, that a wall defended everywhere is truly defended nowhere at all. His scouts report the weakest stretch sits near Wusha Fortress, a gap in the line that will soon decide an empire's fate. But let's change one thing about this frozen morning at Wild Fox Ridge, something no 13th century general could ever have imagined arriving. Instead of scattered Jin infantry, the ridge now holds 4 Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptors, America's stealth air superiority fighter, orbiting silently above. Each Raptor carries 6 AM-120 AMRAAM missiles internally, an M61A2 Vulcan cannon with 480 rounds, and radar invisible to Mongol eyes. Cruising at Mach 1.5, without afterburners, these jets can loiter for hours, while Genghis Khan's vanguard is still hours away. Jeeb, one of Genghis Khan's most brilliant generals, leads the first probing wave, several thousand mounted archers testing the northern approach at dawn. Above them, an F-22 pilot watches the entire formation crystallize on radar screens no bowman below could ever hope to detect or evade. Wave 1 begins. Jeeb's riders surge forward at a gallop, composite bows drawn, arrows arcing toward positions the jets already abandoned minutes earlier. The lead Raptor fires 2 AMRAAM missiles at supply wagons trailing the vanguard, destroying fodder and spare arrows in a single fiery pass. Running tally after Wave 1. 2 missiles expended, 0 Mongol riders killed outright, but Jeeb's supply train now burns black smoke across the ridge. Jeeb adapts instantly, splitting his probing force into smaller groups, forcing the jets to choose between chasing riders or guarding the pass itself. Wave 2 arrives by mid-morning, nearly 10,000 horse archers under Mukhali charge in loose formation, exploiting the gaps between rocky outcrops below. 2 A-10 Thunderbolt 2s arrive low and slow, their GU-8 Avenger cannons capable of firing 3,900 rounds of 30mm shells per minute. The Warhogs dive across the charging line, cannons screaming, shredding earth and horse and rider alike in bursts lasting barely 2 full seconds. Running tally after Wave 2. 1,100 cannon rounds fired, 4 AMRAAMs expended, roughly 600 Mongol cavalry down, ammunition drums now half empty. Mukhali reforms his surviving riders behind a low ridge line, out of the Avengers' 4,000-foot effective range, buying his archers a moment's rest. Genghis Khan, watching from higher ground, commits his main body of 60,000 men, keeping Ogeday's separate force marching hard toward distant Datong. 2 AA-64 Apache helicopters rise from behind the pass, longbow radar tracking 256 individual targets across the churned battlefield below. Each Apache carries 16 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles and a 30mm M230 chain gun firing 625 rounds every single minute of combat. Wave 3 crests the ridge. Thousands of Mongol lancers charging in tight wedges, exactly the massed formation Hellfire missiles were engineered to punish. Running tally after Wave 3. 22 Hellfires fired, 1,800 more chain gun rounds spent, 2,000 additional Mongol cavalry lost to fire. Fuel gauges inside both Apaches now read under 40%, forcing one helicopter to break station and return toward a hidden forward base. Genghis Khan notes the gap in coverage instantly, funneling a fresh column of horse archers directly beneath the withdrawing helicopter's now empty airspace. The remaining Apache burns through its last 4 Hellfires, striking a mangonel train being dragged toward the pass by exhausted captured laborers. Running tally now stands near 50 combined missiles fired, 3,000 cannon rounds spent, and barely half the original Jin garrison still standing. By afternoon, Genghis Khan turns southeast toward Juyong Pass itself, the fortified gateway. The Jin have reinforced 10,000 soldiers under Wanyan Fusheng. The F-22s return from refueling, now carrying GBU-39 small-diameter bombs, in place of half their AMRAAM missiles for the coming siege. Wave 4 begins as Jeeb probes the pass directly, testing its walls exactly as history recorded, before realizing brute force alone will fail here. An F-22 drops 2 small-diameter bombs on a Mongol trebuchet crew. Precision striking equipment history says never actually reached that fortress wall. Running tally after Wave 4. 8 bombs expended, 6 more AMRAAMs fired, ammunition reserves for all 3 aircraft types dropping below 1/3. Jeeb studies the pattern of Raptor sorties, noticing each strike leaves a predictable gap before the jets return from their distant forward airfield. He orders his troops to discard weapons, horses, and provisions, staging the same feigned retreat that historically fooled General Wanyan Fuxing completely in 1211. Aboard an orbiting Raptor, the pilot flags the retreat as suspicious, radar showing riders bunching unnaturally instead of scattering the way routed forces do. But fuel is critical, ammunition nearly spent, and the pilot must choose between investigating further or returning immediately to base for emergency refueling. Wanyan Fuxing, unaware any of this modern shadow war above him even exists, orders his garrison to chase the fleeing Mongols out through the gate. Jeeb's ambush closes exactly as history recorded, and roughly half of Wanyan Fuxing's 10,000 soldiers die in the trap beyond the wall. Running tally after Wave 5. The last Raptor lands empty of missiles. The surviving A-10 has 11 rounds remaining in its ammunition drum. Genghis Khan's main force now surges through the open gate, disguised riders in captured Jin uniforms slipping past the confused remaining defenders inside. With the aircraft grounded for rearming and refueling, Juong Pass falls exactly as it fell in 1211, sword and hoof deciding what missiles could not. Ground crews scramble to reload AMRAAMs, Hellfires, and 30mm shells, but the nearest resupply depot sits nearly 2 hours away by transport truck. Running tally at pass collapse. Roughly 3,200 Mongol cavalry killed across 5 waves against a Jin garrison of 10,000 men. Genghis Khan's army, now reduced by 3,200 casualties, still numbers 56,700 riders streaming south toward Zhongdu itself. By the time the Raptors return armed, the mountain pass already belongs to Mongol banners, and the road toward Zhongdu now lies wide open. A single F-22 makes a final supersonic pass over the captured pass, cannon empty, missiles spent, unable to reverse ground already lost below. The pilot radios back a simple truth. Air power bought 6 hours and killed thousands, but it could not physically occupy stone and earth. Genghis Khan continues his march, unaware that ghosts of a future century had briefly turned his ridge into the deadliest battlefield in history. Running final tally, 50 missiles, roughly 4,800 cannon rounds, and 6 hours of flight time spent defending a pass that still fell. Historically, Zhuangguan fell to Jeeb's ambush regardless, and Zhongdu itself endured a siege before Genghis Khan withdrew north with tribute and a princess. The jets inflicted horrific losses no 13th century commander could have imagined, yet numbers, terrain, and endurance ultimately decided who held the pass. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson buried inside this impossible collision of centuries. Firepower alone rarely wins a war fought over ground and time. Modern aircraft can kill at ranges no archer ever dreamed of reaching, but fuel runs out, missiles run out, and pilots eventually must land. Genghis Khan's real advantage was never numbers or weapons, but patience, deception, and an army willing to keep marching long after modern logistics collapse. Would 6 Raptors and 2 Apaches have saved the Jin dynasty, or merely delayed its fall by half a single brutal afternoon in 1211? History remembers Zhuang Pass as the gateway that opened Zhongdu to conquest, whatever weapons briefly guarded its walls before falling silent that day. So the next time a fighter jet appears in some impossible historical battle, ask yourself what actually wins wars: firepower or simple relentless endurance. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan's third son, Ögedei, rides west with a separate column, tasked with striking the Jin western capital at Daetong before reinforcements arrive. No modern aircraft cover that western front, leaving Ögedei's cavalry to fight exactly as history recorded: arrows and lances against stone and timber walls. This split matters enormously. Every Raptor, Apache, and Warthog defending Wild Fox Ridge cannot also defend Daetong, exposing the limit of any small modern force. Back at the ridge, radar operators inside the lead F-22 notice something troubling: a second Mongol formation looping wide around the mountain's northern flank. This flanking group, 5,000 strong, follows the exact route Genghis Khan historically used to bypass the wall entirely rather than assault it directly. The jets face an impossible choice now: chase the flanking riders through mountain terrain where stealth and speed offer little advantage, or hold the pass. Command decides to hold the pass, accepting that the flanking column will slip past unchallenged, just as it slipped past the real Jin defenders. Running tally adjustment. 0 missiles spent stopping the flanking maneuver, meaning several thousand Mongol riders now threaten the rear of the defended position entirely. Jebe, seeing this opening exploited by his own Khan strategy, redirects a portion of his probing force to link up with the flanking riders. Wave 1.5, as pilots later call it, becomes a two-front problem no single defensive perimeter, however advanced, was ever built to solve. An A-10 breaks from the main engagement to strafe the flanking column instead, burning through 400 rounds before returning to the primary front. Running tally: 1,500 cannon rounds fired total, 400 spent on the flank alone, ammunition reserves already dropping faster than commanders had planned for. By late morning, casualties among Jin infantry manning the actual stone wall remain unchanged, since none of these aircraft can replace soldiers holding a rampart. This is the uncomfortable truth emerging hour by hour. Jets and helicopters can kill riders in the open field but cannot occupy fortifications themselves. Genghis Khan's cavalry, trained since childhood to endure exactly this kind of attrition, regroups faster than any 13th century army reasonably should be able to. Historical accounts describe Mongol horses covering enormous distances daily, sometimes over 100 kilometers, giving Genghis Khan's forces a mobility modern logistics chains cannot match. Wave 3's Hellfire strikes devastate massed lancers, yet scattered riders regroup within minutes, exploiting gullies and ridgelines the missile seeker cannot easily distinguish from rock. Running tally correction: of 22 Hellfires fired, only 14 achieve confirmed kills against moving cavalry, the remainder striking empty ground or already fleeing formations. Fuel burn accelerates faster than planners expected, since both Apaches have been holding station at low altitude rather than cruising efficiently between engagements. A maintenance officer radios grim numbers: spare Hellfire missiles number only 6, spare AMRAAMs only 4, spare cannon belts nearly gone entirely. This is the moment the entire scenario turns from firepower spectacle into logistics crisis, the same crisis that has ended air campaigns throughout modern history. Genghis Khan, of course, knows nothing of missile inventories or fuel gauges, only that the strange thunder above has slowed him by roughly 6 hours. 6 hours, in the context of a war that historically lasted 23 years before the Jin dynasty finally collapsed completely in the year 1234. Jebe's feigned retreat at Jiuyong Pass, the trick that fooled Wanyan Fuxing in real history, unfolds now beneath the very same empty afternoon sky. The lead F-22 pilot, watching the retreat pattern on radar, radios a warning that the withdrawal looks staged, riders bunching instead of scattering naturally. That warning reaches Wanyan Fuxing's radio equivalent, a mounted courier, far too slowly to matter, since no 13th century command structure processes information instantly. Wanyan Fuxing orders the pursuit anyway, exactly as history recorded, unaware that a warning meant to save his garrison never reached him in time. Jebe's ambush springs shut precisely as it did in 1211. Roughly 5,000 Jin soldiers dying in a trap radar detected but could not prevent. This single failure illustrates something crucial about advanced technology. Detection without a fast, trusted channel to the people who need it accomplishes remarkably little. Running tally after the ambush: total missiles expended across both aircraft types now exceeds 50. Total cannon rounds approach 5,000. Reserves critically low. Disguised Mongol riders wearing captured Jin uniforms slip through the chaos exactly as Genghis Khan's forces did historically, infiltrating the fortress from within. No amount of stealth technology detects a man already wearing the uniform of the side he intends to betray from the inside out. Yuong Pass falls by early afternoon, its 10,000-man garrison broken, its gates opened from within by infiltrators the jets never had a chance to stop. Ground crews finish rearming the returning F-22s just as radio reports confirm the pass has already changed hands, rendering the resupply effort strategically pointless. Genghis Khan's main army streams through the captured pass toward Zhongdu. Following the same road his real forces marched down in the summer of 1211. The remaining aircraft regroup over the abandoned Jin positions, cannons silent, missile bays empty, watching an army history says could not be stopped regardless. Running final tally for the pass itself: 54 missiles fired, roughly 5,000 cannon rounds expended, 6 hours of continuous flight time logged. Against those numbers stands a historical outcome that never changed. Juyongguan fell to deception, Zhongdu was besieged, and tribute eventually bought Genghis Khan's withdrawal. By 1213, historical records describe Mongol forces breaking through Juong Pass and the nearby Zijing Gap a second time, deepening the Jin dynasty's collapse. In 1214, Jurchen Princess Chiguo was married to Genghis Khan in exchange for lifting the siege upon Zhongdu, precisely as ancient chronicles still record. Zhongdu itself, the Jin capital now called Beijing, sits behind walls the Mongols will besiege for months, rather than the 6 hours spent here. Historical records describe the 1213 siege stalling until disease and starvation inside the city did more damage than any Mongol siege engine managed alone. No F-22 or Apache appears at that later siege in this scenario, since fuel, spare parts, and pilots simply cannot sustain months of continuous combat. This is the boundary every air power enthusiast eventually confronts. Aircraft dominate hours and days, but wars measured in months belong to logistics and endurance. In 1214, the Jin court offered gold, silk, and the Jurchen princess Chiguo to Genghis Khan in exchange for lifting the siege of Zhengdu entirely. Genghis Khan accepted, withdrew his exhausted army north with treasure and tribute, exactly as the historical record describes, without modern intervention changing that outcome. Fearing a second invasion, the new Jin emperor abandoned Zhengdu in August 1214, relocating the capital south to Kaifeng, deep inside safer Song dynasty territory. That relocation triggered fresh Mongol suspicion, and by 1215 Zhengdu itself had fallen completely, its garrison scattered, its walls finally breached for good. Meanwhile, the Khitan general Yelu Luge, once loyal to the Jin, rebelled in 1211 and pledged allegiance to Genghis Khan, weakening Jin defenses from within. This kind of internal defection, repeated throughout the 23-year war, mattered far more to the eventual Jin collapse than any single battlefield engagement ever could. Back at Wild Fox Ridge, ground crews finally finish rearming all 6 aircraft, nearly 7 hours after the first Mongol scout appeared on radar. By then, Genghis Khan's forces have already crossed through Zhuang Pass, leaving the rearmed jets with nothing left to intercept but empty, snow-dusted mountain trails. A young lieutenant asks the obvious question over the radio: if the ridge already fell, what exactly did those 54 expended missiles actually accomplish today? The answer, delivered flatly by a tired squadron commander, is that they killed thousands of soldiers who would otherwise have marched on Zhengdu completely unharmed. Killing thousands and stopping an army, the commander adds, are 2 entirely different military objectives, and only one of them was ever truly achieved. This distinction defined air campaigns throughout the 20th century, from strategic bombing over Germany to close air support missions over Korea and later Afghanistan. Overwhelming firepower can inflict casualties no earlier century could imagine, yet still fail to hold a single mile of contested ground without soldiers occupying it. Genghis Khan's empire eventually stretched from the Pacific coast to the gates of Europe, built not through superior weapons, but through unmatched mobility and endurance. His Mongol horsemen could travel over 100 kilometers daily, resupplying from herds that traveled alongside them, a logistics advantage no fuel truck ever matches. Modern military historians studying the Mongol conquest of the Jin dynasty still cite this exact campaign as a case study in patience over firepower. The Jin dynasty's Great Wall, nearly 3,000 kilometers long, took decades to build yet failed within months, once Genghis Khan found its weakest seam. That is perhaps the deepest irony. No wall, however long, and no weapon, however advanced, survives contact with an enemy who refuses to stop. By 1234, 23 years after the first shots at Wild Fox Ridge, the Jin dynasty finally collapsed completely under combined Mongol and Song dynasty pressure. 6 modern aircraft could not change that timeline by more than half a day, a humbling thought for anyone imagining technology alone decides every war. Yet for those 6 hours above Wild Fox Ridge, one of history's deadliest mornings briefly existed on a frozen ridge nobody from 1211 could recognize. 8,000 Mongol cavalry died to missiles and cannon fire that would not exist for another 8 centuries, a number no chronicle from 1211 records. And still Genghis Khan rode on, unaware, unbothered, his empire's fate already written by patience and distance rather than by any single afternoon's firepower. So next time a fighter jet appears in some impossible battle, remember Wild Fox Ridge, where the future won every engagement but lost the war. None of that outcome changes here because 6 modern aircraft, however lethal, cannot substitute for the tens of thousands of soldiers required to hold ground. This is perhaps the sharpest irony available to anyone who inserts fighter jets into a 13th century war. Firepower is not the same as occupation. A Raptor pilot can kill 600 cavalry in a single pass, yet still watch helplessly as infiltrators open a gate no missile aimed at. An Apache can track 256 targets simultaneously, yet still run out of fuel exactly when the battlefield needs it most desperately. An A-10 can fire 65 rounds every single second, yet still empty its magazine in 18 seconds if a pilot holds the trigger too long. Genghis Khan's real weapon was never a single archer or horse, but a logistics system able to sustain 100,000 riders across open desert. Modern military planners studying this exact ridge still cite Mongol mobility and deception as case studies in warfare that firepower alone has never solved. So, when the smoke clears over Wild Fox Ridge, roughly 8,000 Mongol cavalry lie dead across 5 separate engagements against 6 defending aircraft. Yet Genghis Khan's remaining 52,000 riders continue marching south, delayed by half a day, but otherwise undeterred by history's most lethal air defense. The historical Jin dynasty endured 23 more years of grinding warfare before finally collapsing in 1234 under a combined Mongol and Song dynasty assault. Would those 23 years have changed at all, had 6 aircraft briefly haunted one frozen ridge on a single March morning in 1211? Perhaps the honest answer is almost nothing, since one battle, however lopsided, rarely rewrites the outcome of a war measured in decades, not hours. Perhaps that is exactly why history remembers Genghis Khan not for battles he lost, since he lost remarkably few, but for the empire he built. Firepower can shape a single afternoon, killing thousands in minutes that would have taken medieval armies entire bloody seasons to accomplish through sword and arrow. But empires are not won in afternoons, they are built through decades of patience, deception, logistics, and an unbroken willingness to keep marching forward regardless. So picture 6 modern aircraft circling one frozen ridge, missiles spent, cannons empty, fuel gauges reading 0, watching history continue exactly as it always did. Picture Genghis Khan himself, unaware that a ghost army from 8 centuries forward had briefly turned his ridge into the deadliest battlefield ever recorded. And ask yourself honestly what actually wins a war stretched across 23 brutal years. Is it firepower, or is it something far more patient? Is it stealth radar and precision missiles, or an army willing to march another 100 kilometers when every modern logistics chain would already have collapsed? History already answered this question once, at Juang Pass, in the summer of 1211, long before anyone imagined an F-22 circling that same sky. Maybe the real lesson is not who wins a single battle, but what happens after the missiles run out and the jets finally go home. If you were defending that ridge, knowing your fuel and ammunition would run out in 6 hours, what would you have done differently that morning?